Hi and welcome back to the giant world of tiny things and part 2 of my video, Creative Macro Subjects in the Kitchen. In this part of the video we're going to photograph this delicious banana, a pomegranate and quite a few other subjects. Let's go! For our next subject I chose a couple lychees which have really interesting textures on their shells. So we're going to photograph them by themselves, then we're going to photograph them both at once, and then I've got something interesting coming up, so stay tuned. All that we're going to do for this next shot is to place our lychee right in the middle of the spoon, just like this. Now I have played around a little bit already and I can tell you that you get the most and longest reflection if you rotate the camera around the spoon quite towards its tip, and at this orientation of the camera and the spoon you will get the longest reflection, and therefore you should be able to fill your frame with the lychee and the reflection itself without any distracting background. But we're going to shoot on this brown cutting board just to make sure that if we get some background it's going to match the color palette but not take away from our subject. Let's take some images. For the next shot we're going to use some wrinkled aluminum foil to create some specular highlights in the background. Now that's a pretty cool shot already, but I think we could make it even better since we're using a speed light that is able to freeze motion by spraying a little bit of mist right into our shot and capturing that in mid-air, settling down on the lychees and also providing some extra bokeh in the foreground. Let's see what we can make happen here. And that is some pretty cool stuff right there, but the shot that I'm actually most excited for is the one that we're just about to take, and for this next shot of our lychee, we're going to chop it in half and photograph it with a speed light from in behind once again, and I think the backlight is really going to bring out some interesting textures. Let's go! Wow, just wow, who would have known that lychees can look this cool up close if you just cut them open and backlight them. Now backlight is always something to be aware of and to play around with because it looks cool in many cases, but I really didn't anticipate it to look this cool with a lychee. I'm really stoked about the result because it kind of reminds me of a planet far out in space or even an erupting sun, and I think I'm going to edit the shots we got and add a black background to make them pop even more. And the coolest part about the subject is that you can photograph it from the inside, from the outside, and the inside especially looks cool with reflected light because it's got some really interesting texture and a really nice shade of pink. Now this is another close-up shot that I just took of it and I think you're really going to enjoy it, at least I'm enjoying it, and that's it for the lychees. Let's move on to our next subject. For our next subject we're going to photograph some potatoes, but to not just photograph any plain boring potato, I dug out a couple old potatoes that are already sprouting, and even though they might not be your number one potato in the kitchen, I think these sprouts are gonna make for some really interesting macro images, so let's get shooting. Wow, now these are some fascinating and odd looking sprouts. I don't think that I personally would guess that I'm looking at potato sprouts if I were to look at these images out of context, but that's why it never gets boring to explore the world looking through a macro lens, and that's why we never stop doing it, right? But I think we're done exploring the potato sprouts. Let's move on to our next subject. Our next subject is gonna be a pomegranate, so let's cut it open and see what we find. Awesome! Now let's move the speedlight on camera and see how that will change the look of our images. Wow, that is another really fascinating subject. I'm glad I included this into this video, but now it's time to move on to our next subject. Next, we're going to photograph our red beads, and because we have to cut them open in order to reveal their beautiful inner textures and patterns, it's a good idea to have a tissue or a cloth or a serviette handy, because as soon as you cut them open, things are going to get messy, and the red dye is easy to get into your clothes but hard to get out of it, so be careful. And that's looking pretty cool, isn't it? However, for the next shot we're going to mount the speedlight on camera together with a diffuser to get a different perspective and a different light. And this is the setup for our last subject, this beautiful yellow banana. And as you can see, I'm using an off-camera speedlight to the one side of the subject to introduce a bit of directed light, while I'm evening that out at the same time from the other side using this pot lid as a makeshift reflector, being held in place once again by my little soldering station, which is so incredibly useful. And for the background, we're not gonna do anything, we're just going to make sure that our exposure allows that light blue ball to show up in our frame out of focus to provide some complementary color contrast to the bright yellow of our subject. Now those were some cool shots. I mean, a banana isn't the most fascinating or the greatest or most spectacular subject in the world of macro photography, but I'm still happy with the results we got. And since we got all our subjects covered, it's time for the bonus challenge and see if we can set this bad boy on fire. And this is the setup that I'm planning to use. We've got our vase made from aluminum foil where we can just place a little bit of rum inside, enough to create a flame and to create some sparkles that will then reflect off of the aluminum foil and off of the strainer in the background, which is going to make for a really interesting pattern because of its symmetrical nature, and hopefully we'll be ready to start shooting. No, unfortunately that's not working, but since we've got the whole setup prepared already, I'm not gonna give up that easy. We'll find something that burns. Now the rum itself didn't quite burn, but I still found a way to incorporate it into the last shot of this video by using it to color the light of the flash that's exposing our background, and I really like how that golden hue of the rum is adding to the warm feeling of this image, and I'm super happy with the result, especially considering that we only used kitchen items to stage it. Well, I know you might not consider industrial cleaner a kitchen item, but I store it under the sink, so whatever. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's content. If you did, as usual, please leave me a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing, hit that bell notification to not miss any future videos, which by the way come out on a weekly basis. So I'll see you soon in another video. Until then, stay creative, keep shooting and have a good time. Bye!